God has a purpose for your pain, a reason for your struggles, and a reward for your faithfulness. Don't be discouraged. Don't give up. Whether it's a difficulty at work, struggle in a relationship, a health issue, complications with unending bills, getting knocked down in life is a certainty. Getting up and keeping going, that's the real choice. In the gospel today, Jesus is confronted by two opposing forces that have designed a plan to get him to say something stupid. Now, I know that all the women in the room would find it hard to believe that a man would say something stupid. But these guys were professionals at it. They knew how to trip other people up. And they had a plan to get Jesus to say something wrong about the city's policies and procedures, about taxation. Who deserved what? And the issue was really, could Jesus be tripped up and be offensive to one group or another? Now, some would focus all of their attention at this point on the issue of what was happening in the gospel passage as far as the complication and the politics. I'd like to take this from a different angle this morning. I believe that God has a purpose for your pain, a reason for your struggle, and a reward for your faithfulness. But it means an attitude of gratitude, and it means that we do not get discouraged, no matter what anyone tries to say or entrap us to do, and that we do not give up. You can't pay for that. When I met Lori for the first time, we were in high school. She was in grade 13. I was attending a brand new high school, Sir Frederick Banting, in London, Ontario. And she was the young girl in front of me in the homeroom. She was very quiet, very quiet, hardly ever said a word. And finally, I tapped her on the shoulder one day and said, "Hi, I'm Steve." She turned and smiled and nodded her head and turned the other way. Now, that was a behavior I was quite familiar with pretty women. A few days later, I decided I would try again. "Good morning, I'm Steve." She turned around, smiled, and said, "I'm Lori." I watched Lori for weeks, coming and going from homeroom. One side of her face seemed to say, she walked a little different. So one day I got enough guts to say, "Lori, can I ask you a question? What happened?" She said, "When I was 18 years old, I was in a terrible car accident. In the middle of the car accident, our car flipped 3 times. And in the midst of the crisis, I had a stroke." I said, "Lori, that happened to you when you were 18. That must have been recent." She said, "No, I'm 25. I'm just getting back to finish high school now. I had to learn how to walk and talk again." You could never tell because Lori was so clean. She was such a pretty girl, you couldn't tell that she was in her mid-20s. You knew when her boyfriend picked her up at the end of the day in his sports car, the way he looked, that she probably wasn't our age. Her determination and her courage, her tenacity and her perseverance. I said, "Do you ever get discouraged?" And she said, "Yeah, but I remember that there's other people worse than me. Some people never get out of that car." I said, "Do you ever give up?" She said, "I can't. It's not as if this is a rehearsal. This is live, and this is the only chance we get." You see, I believe that God has a purpose for your pain, a reason for your struggle, and a reward for your faithfulness. After Fred Astaire's first screening test, the memo from the testing director at MGM, dated 1933, wrote as this: Mr. Astaire can't act. He's a balding little man, and he can only dance a little. Fred Astaire kept that memo over top of his fireplace, where he lived in Beverly Hills, and he just kept on dancing. An expert said of Vince Lombardi, he possesses minimal football knowledge and lacks motivation. And he just kept on playing. Socrates was called an immoral corrupter of the youth, but he just kept on thinking. When Peter J. Daniel was in 4th grade, his teacher, Mrs. Phillips, said to him, "Peter, you're no good, you're a bad apple, and you're never going to amount to anything." Peter was totally illiterate to the time he was 26 years old. And then one of his friends stayed up one weekend and read him the entire book, Think and Grow Rich. Now, Peter owns that section of the city where he had fistfights with his contemporaries at the time. Beethoven handled the violin awkwardly and preferred playing his own compositions. His teacher described him as a hopeless composer, but he just kept on sharing music. Walt Disney was fired by a newspaper editor for a lack of ideas. He also went bankrupt 7 times before he built Disneyland and inspired millions. Because God has a purpose for your pain, a reason for your struggle, and a reward for your faithfulness. Thomas Edison was told by an instructor that he was too stupid to learn anything. And then one day, a light bulb went on. Albert Einstein did not speak until he was 4 years old and couldn't read until he was 7. He was described as mentally slow and unsociable, adrift forever in foolish dreams. That was Albert Einstein. Louis Pasteur was only a mediocre pupil in his undergraduate studies, and he failed chemistry. And we drink to his success. Leo Tolstoy, author of War and Peace, flunked out of college. He was described both as unable and unwilling to learn. W.F. Woolworths was told by his employers that he would never amount to anything because he didn't know how to do customer service. And then he changed how the world shopped. Henry Ford failed and went broke 5 times before he succeeded. He was literally driven to success. Winston Churchill failed 6th grade. He accomplished nothing in his career. He lost every single election until his mid-50s, and he never became truly successful in the political field until he was 62, which just goes to prove that sometimes the best can start in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. And Richard Hooker worked for 7 years on his humorous war novel, MASH, only to have it rejected by 21 publishers before Morrow decided to publish it, and it became a runaway bestseller, and a blockbuster movie, and highly successful television series. When I got to know Christy, she was 4 years old, and we were taking swimming lessons together. She was a cute little kid. Our parents had put us in the same class, mostly because I didn't like swimming in the outside Kinsman pool in Simcoe. It was too cold. And Christy was meant to be an inspiration. She came out and she looked at me. She was in a full tracksuit. And she said, "Your name's Steve. They say you're scared. We're gonna swim." I remember being that age and looking at this kid and thinking, nobody's making me get it out of the water. Christy took off her tracksuit, and underneath was a swimsuit. And then she took off her leg and got in the pool. And swam lanes. Sometimes what motivates us not to give up, not to be discouraged, as Jesus was surely discouraged by those who were in opposition to him on an ongoing basis. But he pressed on by his faith and his courage and his determination. What is stopping you today? Are you clear that God has a purpose for your pain, a reason for your struggles, and a reward for your faithfulness? After all, if all the flunkies that I've just described to you could succeed, can't you? They're no different than you. And God does have a plan, a victorious plan. And as believers in Jesus Christ, who do our best to imitate him, we try not to get discouraged and to never give up. My favorite image as I finish this morning is this. It's an image of a cat, and he's hanging from the edge of a tree. And the caption underneath is, "Hang in there." Sometimes for you and I as believers, it feels like we are hanging in there. The powerful truth is that we are never alone, and Christ is always at our side whenever we need him. There's a wonderful story, and it goes a little bit like this. This guy is mountain climbing, and he falls off the mountain, and he goes several hundred feet, and he's hanging by the edge of the mountain, and he begins to pray. As a matter of fact, he prays loudly as he screams, "God help me, God help me, God help me." And suddenly there's a voice from heaven. And the voice says, "Let go." And the man is sure that he's hearing things. "God help me, God help me, God help me." And he hears the voice again, "Let go." And the man looks up and says, "Is anybody else up there?" We need to be prepared to listen and to hear for God's voice.